Well, welcome back to Virtual School Assembly. Today, our guest is Brent Valle. Brent's an award-winning entrepreneur, speaker, mentor, adventurer, and dad. He's grown and sold several technology companies, made a snowboarding film in Canada, hiked and surfed all over the world, and has founded and run several different philanthropies. And oh yeah, he's working on his first book too. So Brent, you are a busy guy, man.
Hey Tyler, how are you? Thanks for the intro, mate. I am. I love it. I think responsibility is a thing that so many people try to avoid, but I think it's a pathway to living a very fulfilling and meaningful life.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to talk to you. We've had a lot of celebrities on the show, a lot of actors, directors, professional athletes, but I like your story because while you've done a lot of extreme sports and have been very physical in your life, you've also done a lot in business. And I wanted to be able to dig into both of those things. But let's start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about your childhood, how you were raised, where you're from, stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I was born in Melbourne, Australia. I'm 43 years old. I grew up in an Anglo-Saxon family, but I found out at a very, very early age, the age of 5, in fact, that I was actually adopted. So here I was being raised by Australian parents. I had lots of hair back then. I had dark skin, and it was always very interesting at school when the kids used to ask me, well, what country you're from, what nationality you're from, and I'd have to answer. I'd say I'm Australian, yet deep down I actually didn't know my heritage. So I went through a major portion of my life actually not knowing my heritage and my background. And so that was interesting and made for some interesting conversations in the schoolyard. A ton of bullying, of course, which was really, really challenging at the time. But I was a pretty happy kid, went through primary school. My grades were pretty good. I love my mum and dad. They looked after me really well. I played lots of sport, had lots of friends. And then I think the transition into high school changed a little bit. It was like there was more of a focus on academic, and I don't think I'm very academic, and especially around subjects that I may not be interested in, and I can't connect the reason or the meaning why I'm doing something. So that led me down to, my grades started going downhill. And then unfortunately, my mum and dad at the age of 15, they decided to divorce. And this was a really challenging and confronting time in my life. And it kind of left me like, wow, where do I go to here? So dad ended up moving interstate. He was 2,000 kilometers away. And I was, in some ways, I was forced to grow up and be the man around the house, support my mum. And she went through some challenges. And then I got to the age of 17, 18. I just finished school. Back in the day, it was like a TER score, and I scored 32 out of 100 for all of year 12. And I was actually pretty shattered, and I felt low sense of self-worth. But I decided to just take a year off. And then mum said to me, hey, it's really important that you go and get a job now. I don't have any money left after mum and dad's separation. And I was like, that was really confronting. So I went to the local paper, looked up for a job. There was one local nearby. It was in IT. And I ended up getting the job as a store person, and that was kind of like my first full-time job, working in a segue into technology, which I've had my hand in for nearly 25 years, which is scary.
Right. Now, yeah. I know even before you got this job, you kind of had the entrepreneurial spirit. Talk about that a little bit. When you were younger, what were some of the things you do to hustle to raise a little bit of money here and there?
Yeah. So I very quickly latched onto the fact that I could get a bucket, I could get soap, and I could get a sponge out of my mum and dad's cleaning stuff in the laundry. So once I clicked that together, I was like, okay, I can get all this stuff, and then I can go and knock on the neighbours' doors, and I can offer to wash their cars and get money in return. I didn't have to spend any money because mum and dad had all the stuff that I needed. But I could get like $2.50 for a car. Now that $2.50 meant a lot back then. So much so that I could go down to the milk bar after I earned my $2.50 and buy footy cards and bubble gum and all the things that a kid would want to do, right?
Yeah.
So that was probably my first foray into entrepreneurship, and I was very, very young. And it just seemed to always connect with other things that come up, like pamphlet rounds and doing stuff like that. So I was kind of in very, very early, just innately.
Yeah, I love it because we're about the same age, and I did a lot of the same things. When I was younger, I'd go around and earn money. I had a paper route, and I'd spend all that money on baseball cards. I'd go to the 7-Eleven to get a Slurpee, I felt like I was rich because I was earning my own money, and even though my family didn't have much, I felt rich because I could earn that money. So it's awesome.
Very empowering. It's something very empowering about being able to go out and earn your own money, I think.
Yeah. So let's talk about, so after you finished high school and we're going into the tech industry, How long was it till you started your first business?
Yeah, look, I was really fortunate. That first job that I went for, the guy who owned that company was a really, really keen surfer. And we had a lot of similarities. And he was probably the first real father figure, business mentor that I had. And I just gravitated towards him and listened to everything that he said and just was a sponge because I could see the results he was getting. And I could see the lifestyle he was living, and I was like, I want to do that. So if I listen and soak up everything he does, it's going to rub off and have an impact. So, so what happened through him? I worked for him for about 3 or 4 years, and then eventually he decided to wind up one of his businesses and just refine it right back. And then me and two of the fellow employees, actually offered us the sale. He said he'd finance it. We can repay him back over the 2-year period, and the transaction went down. So he ended up selling it to us for $240,000 AUD, and then funded us with a loan so that over the 2 years of building back up the business, we could pay it off. So we didn't have to inject any of our own capital. It was all laid out for us, and we had a business already there, and that was the first business that I had. And 2 years after buying it for $240,000 with my two partners at the time, we ended up selling it for $1.1 million. And I was kind of like, wow, how awesome is this? And then from that money, ended up getting a deposit for our first house in Australia with my then ex-wife. So that was a really significant achievement. I was pretty stoked on that at the time.
Yeah. And I think like many entrepreneurs, that's probably where you got the bug. I know a lot of serial entrepreneurs, they have that first big success and then they just love growing companies and selling them. Talk about some of the other businesses that you've started since then, because you've had a number.
Yeah, for sure. So it was funny with that business, they brought in external management, and 3 years after selling the business, I had a golden handcuff agreement where I had to stay. And then 3 years after selling the business, they said, "No, you're too disruptive," and they made me redundant. So that was kind of really humbling, right? Like my first business, here I was, built it up, sold it, and they're going, "No, you're too disruptive." So off I went. And so that led me to taking a 12 to 13 month hiatus. I just went and changed total industry. I had a corporate national sales manager role. And again, after 13 months, 13 months later, I got made redundant in that role as well. And so I remember driving back over the Westgate Bridge down here in Melbourne, and I called my friend at the time, Jared Bloomfield, and I said, "Hey, mate, we've been talking about starting another tech company." And I said, "Hey, mate, guess what?" And he goes, "What?" And I said, "Well, I've just been made redundant." And he said, "Oh, okay." And then I said, "So we start tomorrow, all right?" And that was it. So we registered the company. We set up a shitty little website, and the rest of the story is history. You know, over a 5-year period, we chucked in $2,000 each. And then in our 5th financial year, we're turning over $27 million in gross sales, which is really, really significant. And we're playing and supplying large enterprise accounts down here in Australia. And then, I don't know, for some reason, we kind of like, do we really want to do this anymore? And we made a decision. We're going through some challenging periods, both in our personal lives, in our marriages. I didn't realize it at the time, because growing a business and being especially rapid growing business, the demands and the people and the staff, it really took its toll personally, and obviously had an impact on the relationship. But yeah, it was an amazing ride, an amazing journey. And to build one and sell it from scratch was very, very rewarding and satisfying. At the same time, very, very challenging, because you're kind of out there on the plank on your own. And it's up to you at the end of the day. And if you don't make it work, then you can't point fingers at anybody. So right. Super exciting.
Yeah, well, that's really cool. It's fun to hear your successes in business, but while you were doing this, you also have always been pretty involved in extreme sports between surfing and snowboarding and mountain climbing and things. How did you get into all those kinds of things?
Yeah, I've always had heaps of energy, whether or not it's an undiagnosed disorder of some kind, I think probably so, but I've always had heaps of energy and passion. And so my passion and love for surfing started when I was 13 years old. My passion and love for skateboarding started before that. And I think it was just like one thing led to another. And I found that, you know, when I was going surfing or going skateboarding, I felt a massive sense of freedom, free from the challenges that I had on the land, or free from the things that I was worrying about. And I enjoyed the feeling of movement, and also the fact that the progression in those sports, there's sports that you can't master. And it's real humbling, because if you fall off when you're skateboarding, it hurts. Right. Like it actually, especially on concrete. But you got to force yourself to get back up. And I think in business as well, it's the same. You're going to have setbacks and there's going to be challenges. we just got to keep going and get back up. And so the surfing and the skateboarding just started leading to other things. And I remember when we were building Engaged Technology Group, we're in our second or third year, I found myself leading away from the things that I was passionate about and doing really, really focusing on work to the point that I was starting to probably lose perspective of who I was as a person. And so I was reconnecting with those sports and going all in them and investing my time and energy and resources into pursuing them even more, that I found a massive sense of freedom. And I found that I was really finding and starting to discover who I actually was at the core. Now, if I look back over the journey in terms of the adoption and the conditioning and then the different things that we all go through as children and then growing into adults, it was just part of the natural progression. And then, yeah, it kind of like led me to rediscover who I really was and what I was really passionate about. And hey, there was some losses around it. I tell you, I used to have a really big circle. And then by going down this path and this journey, my circle got smaller and smaller as I started to kind of wake up and understand and started to respect myself more and set boundary conditions. And but I attribute to that to the adventuring and the love of surfing and just that time away to think and to process and to not be distracted by the noise that's going on in so many of our lives.
That's cool. So you mentioned a little bit about getting to know yourself, and I realized we skipped over that part of your story as far as I know that you met your biological mom at some point, and I'm dying to know now what your heritage is, since you're not, different from your Australian mates when you were growing up. So tell me a little bit about meeting your mom and what you learned about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll let you wait a little bit for where my heritage and my origin from. I had to wait 30 years because I found out when I was 30. So you can wait for like 30 more seconds. But
okay.
It's funny, like everyone used to ask me where you're from, and then they used to say, I reckon you're this, I reckon you're this, or you're Italian, or you're Greek, or you're Spanish. And it used to go on and on. I was like, and then at the age of 30, my then wife was pregnant. She was 30-week pregnant. And I saw her and I was like, somebody carried me around in their stomach and did this for me, because I saw some of the challenges that my ex-wife went through. So, I just went on a journey to find her, and it was a matter of contacting the Department of Human Services, which was a really simple process. It was filling in a form, sending in a check, and then I got a call a couple of weeks later. They said, come on in. So I went in, and then they said, okay, we found your file. And I was like ready to find out everything then and there. And they said, you'll have to come back in a couple of weeks. So I ended up going back in a couple of weeks to a meeting. And I remember walking into the room, and I thought it was just going to be me, but there was 10 other adoptees sitting in the room at the time. And I'm like, what's going on here? Anyway, so it was a 2-hour facilitator session. The first hour, we were just sharing different thoughts about our experience in life so far, some things that we'd like to know. And then the second half of the hour, the facilitator came back into the room and started handing out all our files. And she walked in with these manila files. Being a teacher, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yep. Started handing them out, and then she's handed my one out and put it in front of me, and she said, oh, yours is an interesting one. I'm like, oh no. So anyway, she handed them out to everybody, and then it was kind of like, she said, off you go. And then it was like, open up the manila folder, and then I couldn't believe what I was looking at on the first page. And you've got a birth certificate, right? And it's got your name on it and these type of things. And I had a birth certificate my whole life, but it had my adoptive name on it, my mum and dad's name on it, our religion, just all that type of stuff. And then the first page I open up, and there's my original birth certificate, and it's got a different name, it's got a different month's name, it's got a different religion. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, who am I? And that was what went through my head. I was like, who am I? And the next thing I know, just tears just pouring out onto the page. And then I kind of sat there for a moment, and then I looked up and around, and then I looked around the room, and then everybody else was in exactly the same state, because it was just everyone was just learning all this stuff for the first time. So that was really challenging. And the lady at the end of it, she said, okay, I just encourage you all to, sit with what you've learned today for 6 months, process it, and then perhaps reach out with a letter to your biological mother or father, whoever you've found. And in my head, I'm thinking, there's no way. I'm going home right now. I'm going to look up the directory and I'm going to try and find her. To cut a long story short, that's exactly what happened. Within a day, I'd actually contacted her, spoken to her, and arranged to meet up within a couple of days after that. And it was really moving. It was really confronting. And I've got no doubt I had a lot of shock and trauma from it, especially what was coming around the heritage and my adoption and that type of stuff. But we decided to meet up. I was really, really nervous. I remember we met up at a cafe just out of Melbourne, and I remember driving along. I got out of the car, And for some reason, I rang them to see where they were, and they were down the bottom of a hill, 200 metres down the road in front of a cafe. And at this point in time, I go, I can see yous. And then I hung up the phone, and I remember vividly starting to run, and like everything was like in slow motion, and there was music playing in the background, and like one of those movie moments, right? And then I was like, hang on, what are you doing? You've waited 30 years. There's no point running now. And so I ended up walking to her. And then at that point in time, they just both smothered me and kissed me and hugged me and invaded my personal space massively. And it was really confronting because to me, they felt like strangers. There was no real connection there at that point. And so, yeah, but the next minute they pulled away, and then I've looked down, and then my biological mother, she was pregnant, visually pregnant. I said, oh, look, you're pregnant. And she goes, yeah, I've had no other children since you. And I was kind of like, wow. And it was like, everything was just waiting on two to two together. And I was like, hang on. I grew up in an adopted family as an only child, and I never had any brothers or sisters. And that's what I wanted when I was growing up. And then I'm looking at my biological mother for the first time and going, hang on, I've got a half sister here. And she wasn't born yet, which was quite fascinating. And yeah, so it was really full on, really moving. And we sort of chat. We had a toasted sandwich, and we had a bit of a chat and talked about life. And she asked me how I was, and I said, yeah, it was good. And then I asked her about her life. And then I asked her, I said, so, okay, I'm really curious to know, like, why did you give me up for adoption? And she spoke, and look, I wasn't prepared for what she was going to say at all at the time. And she turned around, she said, look, I was really, really young. I was 16 at the time. And she said, I was raped. And I was like, whoa. And I remember hearing it, and I heard those words, and I was like, and I just smiled, and I put on a mask that so many of us often do in life. And I remember putting on a mask and going, oh yeah, and not thinking too much about it, and not kind of showing any response or reaction to it. And it wasn't until later on I had time to process it all. And that was really heavy. And I hadn't thought about either from her perspective. It was only my selfish thoughts around my experience. And then I thought, it took me years to realise down the track that she'd gone through quite a traumatic experience, and like pretty challenging for her. So I ended up leaving that, and I remember I got home that day, and my then wife, I said to her, "This is what I've just found out. I need to go and sit in a room," and because people were ringing up to find out my heritage, right? Well, that's all they wanted to know. And I just couldn't take any calls. And there's no doubt I was in massive shock and trauma. And it led me to believe, I had a certain belief around who I was as a person, and my belief around myself and my identity. All of that got shocked, got changed to the point where I was in a pretty disempowered state. And it led me to making some decisions and actions down the track that probably led me to create more pain for myself and some of those around me. So super confronting.
Wow. Well, that's definitely not the story I was expecting. But you still haven't told us your heritage. Are you going to? You're just teasing us along.
I am. So I asked her, and she said, yeah. So she said, I'm Turkish. And so you're Turkish. And I was kind of like, at the time, I didn't know what to think about. I thought about like Gallipoli and Anzac Day and how the Australians, the Turks fought. And that day now in Australia, we celebrate it every single year. Right. And that day's got massive meaning for me now, because it's kind of like I've got a foot in both camps. And so that's been a really special thing for me to celebrate. And then also my kids now are very much curious about my heritage, my background as well, which is super exciting. Yeah. So it's Turkish. Sorry to take you so long to get to the point.
No, it's an amazing story, and I appreciate you being willing to share it. It's no surprise then, with a lot of the projects that you're working on now with Shred for Life and the Future Phase, that you've started these philanthropies and these different projects working with kids, helping kids understand who they are and what their potential is. This totally makes sense given your background and where you're coming from. Go ahead and talk about some of these different programs that you've started up and what you're doing with them.
Yeah, sure thing. I think like anybody innovating in business or coming up with new ideas, quite often we solve a problem that we might have experienced ourselves. Mm-hmm. So I was at Engage, I was working a lot, I felt like I lost myself. There was times where I didn't want to show up to meetings just because I was in such a disempowered state, but I'd put the mask on and I'd go to the meeting and I'd smile and say all the things that I need to say to get the outcome that I needed to get, right? As well, not only for me, but also for the client. And it dawned on me that so many other people, and I saw so many other people doing the same thing. And in Australia, and look across the world, we've got engagement challenges with staff and companies. And I believe a massive reason why is because I don't believe a lot of people are aligned to their purpose and what they're truly, truly meant to do. And it's a challenging thing to find it. And there's no like secret recipe to find it. I believe it's a massive, you've got to put one step in front of the other and keep taking action and lean into your passions. But I realized that I needed to create something for myself. So I started traveling and then reading and educating myself around some different stuff. And then, I don't know, I just started talking about different things and posting some content on LinkedIn based on my history, my personal story, my experience. And then I ended up doing some mentoring and taking some people away on these corporate adventures and team building adventures and having real conversations with people. And, you know, I was in some of those moments of people who got limiting beliefs, and I'd push them into a wave and they'd say, I never go surfing because I get eaten by a shark, and then push them into a wave. They stand up for the first time, they catch one, they're like, I caught a wave. I go, yeah, you can do it. And you go, oh, I never thought I could do that. And I always like tie it back to limiting beliefs that people might have on the land, in business or career or relationships, just to start popping those and exposing some of those fake beliefs. Well, they're real beliefs for that person, but they may be disempowering beliefs and not helping somebody get to where they actually want to get to. So we can do a little bit of a rewiring in the adventure world and then translate that into the real world, I like to call. It makes a massive impact in people's lives. And so I just started out doing that, and then it's led me to working with an NBL basketball team down here in Melbourne United, who came over a few years ago and played against OKC and nearly knocked OKC off, which was super exciting, which I was actually fortunate enough to be at that game. And then I was like speaking to adults and teams, and I thought, hey, you know what? Like, kids need all of this information. It's kids who need to discover who they are and begin that journey early on in life. And I believe massively to prevent the challenges that men and women are having later on in life, where the midlife crisis, if you like to coin it that way, we can try to avoid that or minimize that and avoid some of the mental health challenges that we've got in our country, but also all over the world, right? So that's how it kind of like played out, and it was following my heart, leaning into my passions, opening up, showing vulnerability, working hard. And it's just kind of like been a crazy 3 years, all the while going through a divorce, which has been full on as well. So raising 2 kids. So yeah, super fun.
Well, so your life is fascinating. You've had ups and downs. You're doing some amazing things. If you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself?
I've been asked this question a few times, and I think I answer it differently every single time. But I think it'd be just to say, hey, everything's going to be okay.
Right.
Like, everything's going to be okay. The sky's not going to come falling in. God's got a plan. Everything will be taken care of. Yeah, I think just everything's going to be okay, because I believe that, I think for a long period of time in my life, I thought that things weren't going to be okay. And even in business today, sometimes, 20 or 30 years of patterns ingrained, it doesn't just change overnight just because you've got conscious awareness around it, right? You've really got to rewrite the needle and the grooves. And so, I still to this day when I'm working and I'm driving along doing my thing, and they're like, well, chill out, everything's going to be okay. So that's probably how I'd answer the question today in this moment in time, Thursday morning at 7 a.m. in the morning in Melbourne.
Right. Yeah, totally different times over here in the US. But appreciate you waking up to talk to us.
Yeah, good. Yeah, all good.
So Brent, if kids want to kind of follow you and see what you're up to, where's the best place that they can connect with you?
Yeah, awesome. I think probably on my Instagram account. It's funny, I get my son, he's 13 years old, and I get his kids following my stories and commenting on my stories. And now we've got this great space that they're creating with skateboard ramp, the table tennis table and darts. We're going to be running empowering workshops out of here and taking them down the coast. And if there's any kids who want to follow along and see what we're doing, probably the best point would be to connect with me on Instagram at Brent Breaks Bread. And from there, you can follow the links to some of the other businesses and projects that I'm working on. So that's probably the easiest and direct method I do. I post lots of stories there around the process, around doing the work. And I post images of like where I get to go to because of the process of doing the work. So I try to give a balanced perspective of Instagram where it's, hey, this is the real aspirational stuff that I love to do. But hey, if you want to do this stuff, if you want to do this stuff in life, then go and check out all the work that goes into making it happen. And I think sometimes in social media world, we've got this curated content and it doesn't paint a real picture of exactly like what you need to do to actually achieve something external in life.
That's certainly true. Well, thank you. We'll link to that in the description on this video then. And thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been awesome chatting with you and hearing your story.
Oh, thanks very much, Tyler. Thanks for having me on here, mate. It's a pleasure. And I'll be back over in the US hopefully soon, or maybe not until 2021, but maybe we can catch up again.
Cool. That would be awesome.